the agenda, because I want to take care of these prescription drug bills today.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep my remarks brief. I want to just thank Ranking Member Durbin for his leadership on this and for raising this issue and requesting a hearing. I placed a hold on Mr. Barton for many of the reasons that the Ranking Member has articulated. There are others as well, as Ranking Member Durbin alluded. This is just a partial list of our concerns. Some involve the fact that he has moved to dismiss cases against his own clients, a patent conflict of interest. But the list is long, and I know it is extraordinary to request a hearing on a U.S. Attorney nominee. I would urge the Chairman, instead of rejecting the request, to, as a judge would, take the matter under submission, to let us make the further case for why this merits a hearing. But on the particular issue that Ranking Member Durbin raised, his embrace of this known and vocal anti-Semite, Hale Cuccinelli, I want to just broaden the aperture a bit, because I see the administration going after universities, using the pretext of anti-Semitism to bludgeon universities, to threaten their livelihood with threats to hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, in grant funding, in the name of combating anti-Semitism. And I want to make the point, do not bludgeon the universities in my name. I'm Jewish. Do not bludgeon the universities in my name. Do not do this pretending you're serious about combating anti-Semitism. That is not what this is about. You want to combat anti-Semitism? Don't embrace a U.S. attorney who wraps his arms around a known anti-Semite like Hale Cuccinelli. Just don't do it. If Ed Martin was at a college university with Hale Cuccinelli, they'd probably be both grabbed by masked ICE agents and whisked out of the country. I'm not asking for that either. But we should at least make sure that we're not confirming a fellow traveler with a known bigot anti-Semite like Hale Cuccinelli. It was a painful year, I think, for everyone in the Jewish community watching what was happening in universities around the country. It's still painful. I have a lot of disagreement with how universities handled many of these protests, but to ignore any due process for these universities, to grab students off the street wearing masks, that's not how we act in this country. And to chill speech on campus, to attack academic freedom, to do so with no process whatsoever, merely because the administration can. This is how we're going to kill these premier institutions and all of the profound research and the economic benefits the country derives. So if you're going to do this, don't do it in my name, because this is not about anti-Semitism. And if we want to be serious about it, we can't be confirming people that are wrapping their arms around bigots like Hale Cuccinelli. So I appreciate the chairman hearing us out and taking the matter under submission, and we will provide you, Mr. Chairman, with the itemization of our concerns and hope that you will consider a hearing. And I yield back.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for allowing us to.
Mr. President, anyone here remember how Donald Trump promised to end Russia's war on Ukraine in one day if he was elected? That's right, one day. Well, we're 73 days into his term with Russia still raining death and destruction upon the people of Ukraine. And instead of ending the war, Donald Trump has alienated and bullied our allies around the world, our allies. He insulted and blackmailed Ukrainian President Zelensky, who has led Ukrainians fighting bravely for more than 3 years. 46,000 Ukrainians have died in defense of their country. He's decimated low-cost soft power by gutting U.S. aid and Voice of America, giving away our influence and leadership to China and Russia, a move the head of Russian state TV, and get this quote, an awesome decision by Trump. We couldn't shut them down, unfortunately, but America did so itself. By turning our backs on the rest of the world, Donald Trump has undermined the promise of America as a beacon of democracy, freedom, and human rights. And all the while, Russian President Putin is laughing at us, watching with glee as America destroys its own leadership and credibility, something he could only have dreamed of in his former KGB days. If you don't believe me, read the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman. His recent column title tells the story. Quote, "I don't believe a single word Trump and Putin say about Ukraine," end of quote. Or Washington Post column Max Boot wrote, quote, "Putin is playing Trump and Witkoff like a Stradivarius, asking dismayingly what the rest of us are pondering as well. Does Trump seriously believe Putin is negotiating in good faith to end the war in Ukraine?" Or listen to the senior Republican senator from Kentucky. Here's what he said: "Unless we change course, the outcome we're heading for today is one we can least afford, a headline that reads, 'Russia wins, America loses,' an illusory peace that shreds America's credibility, leaving Ukraine under threat, weakens our alliance, and emboldens our enemies." I agree. Consider the last few months of negotiations between Trump and Putin have led almost nowhere and emboldened Russia. A supposed ceasefire was supposed to narrowly limit Russian attacks, and here we have it bombing hospitals. A supposedly deal to stop fighting in the Black Sea was a giveaway to the Russians and undermined the Ukrainians. Or consider President Trump's special peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, a real estate tycoon from New York, who's in competition with Neville Chamberlain for the world's most naive appeaser. Witkoff recently told another Putin apologist, Tucker Carlson, that he liked Putin and didn't regard him as a bad guy. That same Witkoff groveled over Putin's obviously manipulative portrait gift to Trump, and he said those forced at gunpoint in occupied eastern Ukraine to vote in a sham referendum actually really wanted to be part of Russia. He's buying the Kremlin talking points and the long list in total. But as president negotiates away Ukraine's freedom and America's credibility, Congress has an obligation and a constitutional responsibility to act. So I'm glad this week that dozens of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle introduced legislation to make it clear to Russia that broad sanctions will be imposed if Russia does not negotiate in good faith and end this war soon. We owe Ukraine, and we certainly owe our own country nothing less. Mr. President, on another topic of global importance, President Trump once again announced an escalation of trade wars with many of our closest allies and trade partners. He proclaimed it, quote, Liberation Day yesterday. Liberation Day is what he called it. But don't expect any ticker tape parades or flag displays in the windows of American homes to celebrate this Liberation Day. The American public has been clear. They want to see prices come down, not go up. Americans are sick of paying too much for eggs and gas, for the everyday necessities they need to provide for their families, to commute to work, to pay the mortgage. Trump's tariffs are what I call Trump's national sales tax. Trump's national sales tax will do exactly the opposite. The 10% tariffs the president announced will result in an increase of thousands of dollars in costs for households of everyday Americans. Experts estimate that the Trump's national sales tax, these tariffs, will cost the average family $100 a week. That's $5,000 annually. That's a lot of eggs. Trump is pushing our economy in the wrong direction. During a time when many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, this trade war is senseless, frivolous, and dangerous to Americans' family budgets. Who in the world ever dreamed that the last election was about whether we want a trade war with Canada? These tariffs are a tax hike on Americans and will cost businesses, consumers, farmers, and workers. If Trump were less focused on annexing Canada and Greenland and Panama and God knows who else, and raising revenue to pay for billionaire tax cuts, he'd clearly see that the American people ardently disagree with his so-called Liberation Day. In fact, a recent poll found that 60% of Americans oppose the tariffs, and that's before they actually kicked in. Look at the stock market today. How you doing with that retirement account? Most Americans are not doing very well. While the president claims that foreign countries will pay the tariffs, Americans know better. That burden of tariffs is carried by our companies and paid for by our consumers. Rest assured, the uncertainty and fear these tariffs will create will impact our nation's workers and our economy. America knows the economy is going the wrong way under Donald Trump. They won't be fooled. Witness what happened in Wisconsin just a few days ago. Even Trump's Rasputin, Elon Musk, cannot buy his way out of this mess. In fact, the only thing these tariffs are liberating is money from the wallets of hardworking Americans into the bank accounts of billionaires. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to join with my colleagues who are in support of Senator Kane's, I think, thoughtful approach on how we put an end to this tariff war with Canada. And I got to tell you, one of the things about working with Tim Kaine for 40 years is he always keeps a hugely optimistic view of things. And boy, do I need a dose of Tim Kaine optimism today. Because we've seen in our national security domain reckless disregard for classified information, and no one so far held accountable. And the message that sends to our allies, to the men and women who work in our military or intelligence, because if they did the same behavior that the so-called Signal Gate, they'd be fired. Or I need to Tim Kaine optimism today because the long-awaited Republican budget resolution adds $6 trillion to the deficit, $4 trillion in funny math, and about another $2 trillion for tax cuts. So that then brings us to not my words, but Peter Navarro's words, who I happened to be with on a Sunday, says these group of tariffs will add $6 trillion in revenues. Who do you think is going to pay for that? Candidly, it's going to be the people who buy the presiding officer's cars in his great dealerships in Ohio. It's going to be folks in Virginia. We had one of our brewers in yesterday who's already laid off 20% of his staff because he imports malted Pilsner from Canada. What we're seeing with Trump is not America first, but what's going to be is America alone. And I say to anybody I spend way too much time in a Schiff, I know, but America alone is not an America that's safer. And the notional idea that we've picked on our longest, best friend in many ways, and I'm a little biased, my mom's parents were from Canada, but the notion that this president is trying to turn Canada into an enemy is beyond belief. You know, I talked to a senior Canadian leader just the other day. He said, Mark, you know, even if tomorrow Trump says, never mind, as he's gone back and forth a dozen times, say no harm, no foul, the damage we have done to the relationship between America and Canada will take years to recover. Senator Sheen just mentioned airplane flights down 75%. Americans' national anthem booed at hockey games. We had another person in who ships whiskey, Virginia bourbon, up to Canada. All the tariffs are off tomorrow, which they're not. It will be years, if ever, that Canadians will be buying American bourbon again. So, in dreamland, $6 trillion of tariffs, you know, it's the largest tax increase in American history. I believe it actually goes beyond World War I. And the so-called Liberation Day, the only thing that is liberating is this administration's liberating Americans from their savings because the market's down. They're liberating businesses from their supply chains because of so much disruption. And they're liberating consumers from their hard-earned money because this is going to translate into increased costs. This isn't partisan. This isn't Democrat, Republican. This is math. And no matter how much the president wants to strut on the South Lawn, I'm glad to see at least the South Lawn was being used for an announcement today as opposed to another day of a Tesla show lot. Who's going to bear the brunt of this? It's going to be Americans, it's going to be Canadians, it's going to be people around the world. I'm sure my friend has already mentioned this, particularly from Virginia's standpoint. Canada is our second biggest trading partner in Virginia. Virginia businesses export approximately $3.3 billion worth of products to Canada. We import about $3.2 billion. Virginia farmers sell about $430 million of goods to Canada. A lot of Virginia peanuts go to Canada. They're not going to be going. That is going to hurt our economy. Matter of fact, in Virginia, 280,000 jobs in Virginia depend on trade and investment with Canada. I know as governor, I went. I know Senator Kane, as governor, you went because Canada's one of our best partners. What would the reception be tomorrow if we showed up in Ottawa? This is not going to be just another economic policy. This is at the lifeblood of the Canadian economy, and combined with the so-called reciprocal tariffs around the world, it is the lifeblood of the American economy. So I know Senator Van Hollen's going to say a lot of the same things that I was going to say. I would just say to the presiding officer again, I know you sell great cars, but I'm not sure even folks in Ohio are going to be able to afford $2,000 or $5,000 more per car just because of ill-suited tariffs. So I hope that folks on both sides of the aisle will actually stand up for America first. Reject this misguided tariff strategy. Reject this demonization of Canada. Recognize that America first doesn't have to be America alone. The only thing that could make my day actually better at this point, beyond that little dose of Kane optimism, if the Senate finally comes to its senses tonight, endorses Tim's resolution, and we put an end to this misguided economic policy. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.